South Africa's defunct apartheid regime enforced strict racial segregation. The system has been dead for 2 decades, but it has left deep scars. Here again is Anita Powell, looking back at the policy of inequality that Mandela fought against for most of his life.
Apartheid is an Afrikaans word meaning separation. But in modern South Africa, it means so much more. Although the system was only formalized in 1948, a form of it was imposed in the late 1600s by Dutch settlers who forbade intermarriage. Over the next few centuries, non-white South Africans lost more and more rights. At the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg, this painful history is laid bare. At the center of the story, one man looms large: Nelson Mandela, South Africa's first black president and a champion of the long and painful fight against apartheid. For his armed opposition to racist rule, he spent 27 years in prison. Many others died for the cause, including some 130 activists who were executed for their opposition to apartheid. Apartheid was not just restricted to blacks and whites, notes 23-year-old student Sarisha Singh, whose Indian family was separated from the white population.
The most difficult part was the segregation that they had to feel, where every race had their own place in South Africa.
When Hélène Cherdu and Rory Sankwate visited the Apartheid Museum, they were stunned to realize that their interracial relationship, he's black, she's of mixed race, would have been illegal. Kwate, a 30-year-old stage performer, said his father rarely talks about apartheid.
Actually, still today it's a sore subject because my grandfather was also taken in the middle of the night. He was also an activist and he was taken and he died in prison. And, you know, they said he slipped on a bar of soap, which was one of the commonly used excuses. But, of course, when his body was delivered, it was bruised, you know, beyond recognition, because he had been severely tortured, beaten, with the intention of trying to obtain whatever information they thought he had, or that he had. And so, till today, whenever I speak to my father about it, because he was only 12 when it happened, you know, the conversation lasts 5 minutes.
Mr. Mandela spent a lot of time here in Johannesburg's Sophiatown neighborhood when he was a young anti-apartheid activist. At the time, it was the only area where blacks could own land and was a hub for black culture. The apartheid government destroyed that in 1955, moving out 60,000 residents. In modern-day Sophiatown, the house where Mr. Mandela became head of the African National Congress Youth League is now a museum. Museum guide Victor Mckenna was one of the residents whose family was forcibly evicted. He was 11 years old and shared a house on Good Street with his parents and 7 siblings. They were moved to Soweto, where he still lives today.
Yeah, I am angry in the sense that we lost a lot of family and friends who we were accustomed, who we grew up with, because there are some families who did not qualify to be in the urban areas, and as such the past laws did not allow them to be moved to Soweto, and some of those families had to be repatriated back into the what they regarded as homelands, that was the rural areas. And of course there's an incident too of a person who hanged himself in one of the streets here because he did not qualify to be given a house in an urban area, and then he had to part.
Artist and writer Steve Quinn Makwana grew up in Soweto in the 1970s. He's now writing a book about his experience and also paints powerful images of the deep scars apartheid has left. He shows them at his gallery near Sophiatown. Quinn, as he is known, grew up during the last violent days of apartheid. Army tanks patrolled the streets near his school. Fellow pupils were often arrested. He says the adjustment has been hard.
Apartheid was very petty because you couldn't leave the township and go to town without your passbook, your ID document in the back of in your back pocket, because you will be stopped, you will be asked for it. People would not return from home, from work, and instinctively people would assume, no, they have been arrested, because it was that usual you know. So how you control people's aspirations, people's movement, people's sense of who you are inside, has had very lasting effects on people, you know. Even now when you are told, no, okay, you live in a democratic society and you're free. You're free to walk, you're free to write, you're free to sing, you're free to jump. It still does not occur naturally.
Apartheid is finished, but the system and the man who brought it down will never be forgotten. Anita Powell, VOA News, Johannesburg.